There is a story rapidly growing faster than the tide down in the Keys, specifically Key Largo. Some say it's folklore and some say it's a legend to become. But like most legends, they take decades, if not centuries, to develop. And yet this one just originated 5 short years ago. And it didn't originate in Key Largo. It actually originated right here in the Tampa Bay area. And the reason I know this is because I was there. See, it was a Saturday, March 7th, 2020. We arrived at Fort DeSoto East Beach about 5:30 in the morning. It was still dark outside. And although it was dark and I couldn't really see, the beach was just alive with energy and movement and taillights and laughter and anticipation and excitement. And with me was my stepfather, Jim, who at the time was 73 years old. Now, what you need to know about Jim was a lifetime sailor. He had learned sailing at a young age. He had developed a love for sailing, and he spent a good portion of his life either teaching sailing or captaining huge sailboats. And so Jim was about to undertake one final challenge of his lifetime, a way to prove to himself his sailing prowess, one final coup de grace. And this challenge was called the Everglades Challenge. And that is a grueling 300 nautical mile race from Fort DeSoto Park down to Key Largo. And the rules of the race were you had to be in some sort of watercraft, anywhere from a kayak to a trimaran to a single hull sailboat, but it had to be small enough that you could physically push it off the beach yourself. And at 73, Jim was about to undertake this mission. So we got some volunteers. We lifted his boat off the trailer and got it set up on the beach on some inflatable rollers, and he had staked it so it wouldn't roll into the water until he was ready. Then he grabbed all his safety equipment and he went to check-in. And so at check-in, there was all these release forms, and I remember thinking how dramatic can they be when I read things like, caution, do not read at your own peril. Regardless of how skilled you are, even if you are an expert sailor, you may die in this race. This race is unassisted. You are on your own. Enter at your own peril. And I thought, they're being pretty dramatic about this stuff. And so he signed all his release forms, and they checked his safety equipment. And 2 main pieces of equipment that he had to have was his EPIRB, his emergency position indicating reckoning beacon or something to that. Don't quote me on the name of it. But that was basically an emergency beacon that if the proverbial poop hit the fan, this thing would activate and call the Coast Guard and ping his location so they could come find him. Now, there's 2 types of EPIRBs out there. There's the really expensive, fancy ones that if they get submerged, they automatically go off. Well, Jim was thrifty, and he had one of the manual-operated ones where you had to push the button. And then there was the spot device. And the spot device was just simply a GPS device. And it would automatically ping his location about every half hour so that race monitors could check his progress. And even we as family members could log into the website and see where his boat was on the race. And so it was about 6:30. The sun was coming up, and it was a magnificent sight. The entire beach, over 100 sailboats, lined up and staged and ready for the start of the race. And Jim was making his last minute checks and everything else, and then 7 a.m. came and the horn blew and the race was on. And Jim pulled a stake and he gave a good push on his sailboat and slowly started to roll towards the water, and it hit the waves breaking on the beach, and he pushed it through until he was about waist high, at which point he jumped in the boat and he started rowing past the breaking waves. And then I saw him drop his sails, and I saw the wind catch the sails, and he was underway at the start of his journey. And I remember yelling out, "Fair winds and following seas, my friend. I'll see you in Key Largo." And he turned back at me and he laughed. And he said, "By sail or soul, I will be there." Little did I know that would be the last time I would ever see Jim. So I went home after that, and I logged into the website, and I saw that the spot device was working, and it was tracking his progress in the race. And I periodically checked throughout the day, and I got to see him round around Anna Marie Island, and he was heading down south, down the coast of Florida, close to the shoreline. And then by nighttime came, everything seemed perfect. He was down past Siesta Key, I think almost near Venice Beach at that point, and I went to bed, and everything was well. And then the next morning, everything seemed good too. Jim actually called because he was just off the coast of Florida and he had cell phone reception. Isn't technology amazing? And he was excited and full of energy, and he was talking about how, what he ate and how the trip was going, and he was this was the journey of a lifetime for him. And I had asked, how did you sleep? Because I slept great. The wind blowing south, so I just dropped my sails and let the current do all the work while I slept all night. And I was like, okay, well, if that works, that works. And so we chatted a little bit longer, and then we said our goodbyes. And that was the last time I ever spoke to Jim. Because the next morning, on Monday morning, the race organizers called at 7 a.m. They had lost contact with Jim's boat. His spot device was no longer pinging. And when he logged in and looked at his track, he had been heading south. But during the night, the wind shifted from south to west, and it started to push him out to sea unbeknownst to him. And so when he woke up, he was 30 miles offshore, no cell phone reception. When you look at the weather those days, it was 8 to 10 foot seas, 20 knot winds, gusting up to 30 knots, and he was in a 17-foot sailboat. It was not looking good for him. So eventually, the Coast Guard did get involved because we could not get a hold of him. And they were absolutely amazing. No resources were spared. They had several ships, several airplanes, helicopters, running search grids day and night, 24/7. And every day they'd call and report. And they'd tell you how many square miles they had searched that day. And unfortunately, it just didn't find anything. And then at that point, they would tell you what his probability of survival was. And then by Thursday, they actually found his boat 80 miles off the shore of Florida, heading west towards Mexico. And at this point, the boat was capsized. The mast had been ripped off and battered by the sea. But there was still no sign of Jim. And at that point, on Friday, with a probability of survival at 0, they called the search off and officially proclaimed Jim lost at sea, presumed dead. But this story is not over. But I am getting waved, and I'd like to finish this story. Okay.
Go ahead, wrap it up. Got a little time, extra time today.
So, at this point, we're trying to get on with life and work through the grieving process, but it's kind of hard to work through the grieving process when you don't have closure, and when you don't find a body, believe it or not, regardless of what logic and reality tells you, you still have a sense of hope that he's going to somehow appear out of nowhere at any moment. But then 3 weeks later, the phone rings, and it's someone calling for Jim. Now, I hadn't even dealt with this up to this point. What do you say? Well, he's dead. That's not a good way to answer the phone. And I'm just like, well, he's unavailable. This is his stepson. He says, well, I had a boat wash up in my backyard, and I checked the registration numbers and traced them back to Jim Slauson. Is he missing a boat? And at this point, I have to explain the story that Jim was involved in a sailing race from Fort DeSoto down to Key Largo, and that he was lost at sea. But the last time we saw his boat was 80 miles off the coast of Florida, heading in the opposite direction towards Mexico. And he goes, that was your dad? I lived 3 properties down from the Pelican Cottages in Key Largo Bay. Now, the one thing I didn't share is the Pelican Cottages in Key Largo Bay was the official finish line of the race. And I sat there trying to absorb what I had just heard. And then his words came back to me, by sailor's soul, I'll be there. And I kind of laughed with tears in my eyes, and I said, well, if you knew Jim, he was always kind of a little lost. But it sounds like he finally finished his race. And so, as the legend goes, if you stand on the beaches behind the Pelican Cottages in Key Largo, just before dawn, as the sun rises over the background of Key Largo, and you look west-northwest over Key Largo Bay into the horizon, you can see a silhouette of a man rowing towards you, the finish line. And so to Jim, the man, the legend, may your soul forever sail Key Largo Bay. Thank you.